Sign this. Now. The contract hit the marble table as camera flashes exploded around them. Kang Min-jun's grip tightened on Naledi Mthembu's wrist, while reporters screamed questions outside the glass conference room of Kang Industries. "I won't," she started. "You will." His Swiss watch caught the light as he pointed to Clause 17. 6 months as my girlfriend, or your visa expires tomorrow. Behind the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seoul's media vultures pressed against the glass, their lenses capturing every moment of her destruction. The headline was already written: CEO's secret African mistress exposed. "This is blackmail," she whispered, her traditional Zulu necklace catching the harsh fluorescent lights. "This is survival." He slid a golden pen across the table. "For both of us." The rain outside had turned Gangnam's streets into liquid mirrors, but inside the executive office, the storm was far more dangerous. 3 minutes ago, Naledi had been a simple English teacher running late for a meeting. Now she was trapped in a web of corporate manipulation that would either save them both or destroy everything they'd ever cared about. "The photographers won't leave until they get their story," Min-jun continued, his tired eyes holding depths of desperation she'd never seen before. "Either we give them the narrative we want, or they create one that ruins us both." But what neither of them saw was Park Woo-jin in the shadows, finger hovering over his phone, ready to release the photos that would transform their fake contract into a very real war. If your life could be rewritten by a single photograph, would you fight the narrative or let it consume you? Min-jun's office felt like a fortress of glass and steel, where every surface reflected Naledi's nervous energy back at her. The signed contract lay between them like a declaration of war, its 27 pages of legal language binding their lives together for exactly 365 days. "The media thinks we're in love," Min-jun said, loosening his tie as he moved to pour himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher on his desk. "We need to maintain that illusion." "For 6 months," Naledi repeated, still processing the impossibility of what she'd just agreed to. 6 months, he confirmed. Public appearances, family dinners, corporate galas. In exchange, visa sponsorship, housing, and enough money to disappear anywhere in the world when this ends. He opened a silver pillbox and dry swallowed 2 white tablets, a ritual she'd noticed during their brief encounter at the cafe yesterday. The encounter that had started this entire mess. "What are those for?" she asked. "Sleep. Or the attempt at it." His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting insomnia for years. "I haven't slept properly since my father died 3 years ago." The admission surprised her with its honesty. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Everyone dies. Some just leave bigger messes behind." He gestured to the Seoul skyline visible through his windows. "My mother has been persistent about my personal life. Your unexpected appearance has bought me time to find a suitable wife on my own terms." Not her chosen candidate? Definitely not her chosen candidate. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Park Woo-jin has been circling like a vulture, positioning himself as the perfect son-in-law. This arrangement disrupts his plans. "And what about my plans?" Naledi asked. "I came to Seoul to teach English, not to become a prop in a corporate power play." Min-jun studied her with the sharp attention he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. "What were you running from in South Africa?" The question hit too close to home. Her expired visa, her dwindling savings, the marriage arrangement with Mandla Zulu that her family had orchestrated, all the reasons she'd fled Johannesburg for Seoul's anonymous crowds. "That's not part of the contract," she said carefully. "It is now. If we're going to convince Seoul's media that this is real, I need to know what landmines to avoid." Before she could respond, his office door opened, without a knock. Oh Jinny entered carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who'd been managing crises long before dawn. The story is already trending, Jinny announced, her delicate glasses reflecting the computer screens she suddenly produced. 3 major networks, 7 newspapers, and approximately 40,000 social media posts in the last hour. She turned to Naledi with professional assessment. We need to discuss your presentation. The media will expect certain standards. What kind of standards? Naledi asked, though she suspected she already knew. Designer clothes, proper etiquette training, a biography that doesn't include any inconvenient details about why a South African teacher suddenly appeared in Seoul. Jinny's voice remained diplomatic, but the implication was clear. You want me to become someone else entirely. I want you to become someone who won't embarrass the Kang family name, Minjun said bluntly. My mother will dissect every gesture, every word, every breath you take in public. If she finds any weakness, she'll use it. As if summoned by their conversation, the elevator chimed. Chairwoman Kang Soo-jin emerged like an elegant storm, her traditional hanbok making her look like royalty inspecting her subjects. Her antique family brooch caught the light as she moved, and her dark eyes immediately fixed on Naledi with surgical precision. So, she said without preamble, you're the young woman who's captured my son's attention so dramatically. Aomionim. Minjun stood, his voice shifting into formal register. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. Her gaze never left Naledi. Miss Mthembu, isn't it? How fascinating. And what exactly are your intentions regarding my son? The question carried the weight of generations of Korean hierarchy, family honor, and social expectations that Naledi barely understood. She stood, bowing slightly as Jinnae had hastily whispered she should. I care about him very much, Sajangnim. Care. The word seemed to amuse the chairwoman. How wonderfully simple. In Korea, Miss Mthembu, we understand that feelings are luxuries few can afford. Family stability, social position, corporate reputation, these create lasting foundations. With respect, Sajangnim, love also creates lasting foundations. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jinnae's eyes widened behind her glasses, and Minjun's jaw tightened with something between admiration and terror. Love, Chairwoman Kang repeated, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. How charmingly naive. Tell me, dear, what do you know about sacrifice? About duty to family? More than you might think. Really? Because from where I stand, you appear to be a young woman who abandoned her responsibilities in one country to pursue opportunities in another. The words hit like physical blows. Somehow, this woman already knew about the marriage arrangement, about her flight from Johannesburg, about the family honor she'd supposedly damaged by refusing to marry Mandla. I never agreed to marry someone I didn't love, Naledi said quietly. Agreement is rarely required for duty. The chairwoman moved closer, her presence filling the space like expensive perfume mixed with subtle threat. But perhaps we can discuss this further over dinner. Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock sharp. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. After she left, the office fell into heavy silence. Through the windows, Seoul pulsed with its eternal rhythm of ambition and survival. While 40 stories above the street, 3 people contemplated the complex chess game they'd just entered. She knows, Naledi whispered. About South Africa. About everything. My mother investigates everyone who enters our world, Minjun said grimly. The question is how much she knows, and what she plans to do with that information. Jinhae gathered her files with mechanical precision. We need to control the narrative before she does. The first public appearance is tomorrow night's charity gala. 300 guests, half the Korean media, and every social elite in Seoul. I don't know if I can do this, Naledi said. Minjun moved to stand beside her at the windows. Below them, Seoul sparkled like a circuit board of dreams and nightmares. 10 million people pursuing their own complicated relationships with truth and survival. For what it's worth, he said quietly. When you stood up to my mother just now, that was the first time in years someone has challenged her directly in my presence. Was that good or bad? Honestly, I'm not sure. But it was impressive. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the marble floor, Naledi realized she'd signed more than a contract. She'd entered a world where every gesture was scrutinized, every word weighed for its strategic value, and love, if it existed at all, was just another piece to be maneuvered on an board where the stakes were measured in billions. But what none of them knew was that Park Woo-jin was already 3 moves ahead, and the game he was playing would put far more than money at risk. The Lotta Hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the quiet murmur of Seoul's elite. Naledi smoothed her midnight blue designer dress, a creation that Jinhae had selected with military precision and that probably cost more than her previous year's salary. Remember your backstory, Jinhae whispered as they approached the entrance. You've been dating privately for 4 months. You met at a cultural exchange event. You love Korean classical music. I don't know anything about Korean classical music. Then smile and let him talk. Your job tonight is to look devoted, not knowledgeable. Minjun appeared beside her like a shadow materializing, his hand finding the small of her back with practiced ease. The touch sent an unexpected shiver through her. Not entirely unpleasant, but definitely dangerous given their arrangement. Ready for your debut? He murmured against her ear. The cameras flashed the moment they stepped into the ballroom. Kang Industries' mysterious romance revealed would be tomorrow's headline. Naledi felt like a specimen under a microscope as Seoul's most powerful women evaluated her with surgical precision. The room was a careful geography of power and influence. Corporate titans clustered near the bar, their wives forming separate constellations of designer handbags and subtle competition. Government officials maintained diplomatic distances from business leaders, while media representatives circulated like well-dressed sharks, sensing blood in the water. Minjuna, a woman in an elegant gray hanbok, approached, someone Jinhae had identified as the wife of Samsung's vice president. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. You must introduce us to your surprise companion. This is Naledi Mthembu, Minjun said, his public voice carrying just the right note of protective pride. Naledi, meet Mrs. Lee Sunhee. Such an unusual name, Mrs. Lee said, her English accent perfectly polished. African, isn't it? How exotic. And what do you do, my dear? I teach English, Naledi replied, acutely aware that every nearby conversation had paused to eavesdrop. How lovely. Children, I assume? Such a nurturing profession? The pause before nurturing carried enough subtext to write a novel. Before Naledi could respond, another voice cut through the tension like a blade wrapped in velvet. Mrs. Lee, still charming as ever. Park Woo-jin materialized beside them, his navy suit impeccable, his smile radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing you were about to win. His gold cufflinks caught the chandelier light as he raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. Miss Mthembu, he continued, you look radiant tonight. Love certainly suits you. The compliment felt like a trap wrapped in silk. Naledi could sense Minjun's tension increase, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her waist. "Thank you, Parksy. Though I have to say, the photographs from yesterday don't quite capture your presence. The camera can be so limiting, don't you think?" His eyes lingered on her Zulu necklace, visible above the dress's neckline. Especially when documenting such spontaneous moments. The implication was clear. He knew the cafe encounter hadn't been accidental. But how much did he know about the orchestration behind it? "Some moments are worth documenting," Minjun said, his voice carrying warning. "Others are better left as private memories." "Oh, I agree completely. Privacy is so important in relationships, though it's becoming increasingly rare in our digital age." Woo Jin's smile never wavered. Information has a way of surfacing when you least expect it. Before the verbal sparring could escalate, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A master of ceremonies approached the small stage at the front of the room, and the crowd began to settle into the evening's formal program. "Saved by protocol," Minjun murmured, as they moved toward their assigned table. But this isn't over. Their table was strategically positioned, close enough to the stage to demonstrate their importance, but far enough from the head table to avoid direct oversight from the evening's most powerful attendees. The other guests were a carefully curated mix. 2 board members from Kang Industries with their wives, a prominent prosecutor and his husband, and a renowned artist whose latest exhibition had been sponsored by the Kang Family Foundation. As the charity auction began, Naledi found herself relaxing slightly. The evening had a rhythm to it. Speeches about worthy causes, elegant presentations of donated items, the polite applause of people for whom the amounts being bid represented pocket change. "Lot 15, the auctioneer announced, a private piano recital by acclaimed classical musician Kim So-young, to be performed in the winner's home. The bidding opened at 50 million won and quickly escalated. Naledi watched in fascination as hands raised and fell with practiced efficiency, the numbers climbing to amounts that could fund her teaching program for a decade. 150 million won, came a voice from the back of the room. All heads turned. Park Woo-jin stood beside his table, his expression serene, his bid effectively ending the competition. 150 million won, going once, the auctioneer called. 200 million. This time it was Minjun, his hand raised with casual authority. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. 250 million. Woo Jin's voice carried across the room like a challenge. 300 million. Minjun didn't hesitate. The ballroom had gone completely silent. This was no longer about charity or music. This was a public display of corporate machismo, 2 alpha males using money as weapons in front of Seoul's elite. Going once, going twice. The auctioneer's voice trembled with excitement. Sold to Mr. Kang Minjun for 300 million won. Applause erupted, but Naledi could feel the undercurrents of speculation. Tomorrow's society pages would dissect every aspect of the bidding war, analyzing what it meant that Korea's most eligible bachelor had spent 300 million won on a piano recital for his mysterious girlfriend. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered as the evening continued around them. "Yes, I did," Minjun replied. "In this world, everything is about sending messages. The message I just sent is that you're worth defending." But as the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Naledi caught sight of Park Woo-jin near the ballroom's exit. He was speaking quietly into his phone, his eyes following their movement across the room. "I think we've made an enemy," she said quietly. "We were already enemies," Minjun replied. "Tonight we just made it official." As they walked toward the valet stand, neither of them noticed the photographer hidden in the hotel's carefully landscaped gardens, telephoto lens capturing every gesture, every glance, every moment of their carefully orchestrated romance. The pictures would be worth a fortune to the right buyer. And Park Woo-jin already knew exactly who that buyer would be. Min Jun's penthouse was a monument to sleepless nights. Empty coffee cups formed small armies across the marble countertops. Expensive exercise equipment gathered dust in corners, and the enormous windows offered a panoramic view of Seoul's neon-lit insomnia. Naledi found him on the balcony at 3:17 a.m., still wearing his dress shirt from the gala, but with his tie discarded and his collar open. The city sparkled below them like scattered diamonds, 10 million people pursuing their own complicated relationships with rest. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, wrapping her sweater tighter against the October chill. He didn't turn around. "I don't sleep. Not anymore." "How long has it been?" 3 years? 4 months? 18 days? The precision of his grief struck her like a physical blow. "Since my father's funeral. Since I inherited all of this." He gestured at the city spread below them. She moved to stand beside him at the glass railing, their shoulders almost touching. "That's a heavy inheritance. 10,000 jobs, 30 billion in revenue, 3 generations of family legacy." His voice was flat, emotionless. "And I lie awake every night wondering if I'm strong enough to carry it. Is that what the pills are for?" "The pills don't work anymore. I've built up too much tolerance." He rolled the silver pillbox between his fingers like worry beads. "My doctor says I need to address the underlying anxiety. But how do you treat anxiety when your entire life is anxiety-inducing?" Naledi studied his profile, the sharp jawline, the shadows under his eyes that no amount of expensive concealer could hide, the way he held himself like a man carrying the weight of the world. "Can I tell you something?" she said quietly. "What?" "I haven't slept properly since I left South Africa. 6 months of lying awake, wondering if I made the right choice, if my family will ever forgive me, if I'm strong enough to build a life on my own." He looked at her for the first time since she'd joined him. "Guilt insomnia? The worst kind. Because you can't medicate guilt. You can only face it or run from it." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 exiles from sleep, finding solace in shared darkness. Below them, Seoul breathed with the rhythm of a city that never truly rested. "The chamomile tea," she said suddenly. "Every night at 9 p.m. I've seen you drinking it since I moved in. Routine. It doesn't help, but..." He shrugged. "Routine is sometimes all we have." "My grandmother had a theory about insomnia," Naledi said. "She said sleep comes to people who have made peace with their choices. The problem is, most of us never get the luxury of making choices we can live with. What would you choose differently?" The question hung in the cool air between them. Naledi thought about Mandla Zulu, about the marriage arrangement that had felt like a cage, about the family expectations that had driven her across oceans. "I'd choose to stay and fight instead of running away. I'd choose to trust that the people who love me would support my decisions, even if they didn't understand them. And now? Now I'm in Seoul, pretending to love a man who can't sleep, bound by a contract that's either going to save us both or destroy everything we care about." Minjun turned to face her fully. "Do you regret signing it?" The question was more complex than it seemed. 3 days ago, she'd been an unknown English teacher facing deportation. Tonight, she'd attended one of Seoul's most exclusive charity galas as the official girlfriend of one of Korea's most powerful men. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in a penthouse that most people could only dream of. But she'd also walked into a world where every gesture was analyzed, every relationship was strategic, and love, if it existed at all, was just another commodity to be bought and sold. "Ask me again in 6 months," she said finally. Fair enough. He was quiet for a moment, then, would you like some tea? Real tea, not the medicinal stuff. What kind? Rooibos. I had Jinnae order it after she researched your background. Thought you might be homesick. The gesture surprised her with its thoughtfulness. I'd like that. They settled onto the outdoor sofa, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill, sharing steaming cups of tea that tasted like memories of home. For the first time since she'd known him, Min-jun looked peaceful. Not the controlled composure of his public persona, but genuine relaxation. Can I ask you something personal? Naledi said. We're fake dating. I think we're past the boundaries of personal questions. Why me? Of all the women in Seoul, all the suitable candidates your mother could arrange, why did you choose to fabricate a relationship with a complete stranger? Min-jun was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because when you looked at me in that cafe, when you stumbled and I caught you, you didn't see the CEO or the fortune or the family name. You just saw someone who was there when you needed help. I can't remember the last time someone looked at me like I was just human. The admission hung between them like a fragile thing that might shatter if examined too closely. Around them, Seoul's endless symphony of traffic and nightlife continued. But on the balcony, time seemed suspended. For what it's worth, Naledi said, you're the first person who's made me feel like my choices matter, even the wrong ones. When she woke the next morning, she was still on the balcony, covered by an expensive cashmere throw. Min-jun was asleep in the chair beside her, his face relaxed in genuine rest for the first time in months. And for just a moment, before the careful boundaries of their arrangement reasserted themselves, it felt like something real. But what neither of them knew was that their late-night conversation had been recorded by long-range surveillance equipment positioned in the building across the street. Equipment that belonged to Park Woo-jin's expanding investigation into their relationship. Some intimacies, he was learning, were worth more than money. They were worth control. The Kang family estate loomed against Seoul's autumn sky like a fortress built of tradition and uncompromising will. Naledi smoothed her hanbok, a gift from Ginny that felt like wearing someone else's identity, and tried to calm her racing heart as their car wound through the private grounds. Remember, Min-jun murmured as they approached the main house. Formal speech patterns only. Answer questions briefly and respectfully. And whatever my mother says about marriage traditions or family obligations, I smile, nod, and agree gracefully. I know. But nothing could have prepared her for the psychological battlefield disguised as Sunday dinner. Chairwoman Kang presided over the low traditional table like an empress holding court, her dark hanbok making her look both timeless and intimidating. The meal was served with ceremony, each course presented at precisely timed intervals, each dish a masterpiece of Korean culinary tradition that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Now, Lady C, the chairwoman said, delicately placing her silver chopsticks on their rest. Tell me about your family. I'm quite curious about South African customs. My family values education and hard work, said Jangnim. My father is a professor of engineering. My mother teaches primary school. How admirable. Middle-class academics. And your extended family? The question felt like a trap. Naledi thought of her grandmother's stories about Zulu royal lineage, about the distant connections to traditional leadership that had made Mandla Zulu's marriage proposal politically as well as personally motivated. We have traditional connections. My grandmother's family has historical ties to community leadership. Traditional leadership. The chairwoman's eyes sharpened with interest. How fascinating. In Korea, we understand the weight of family legacy, the obligations that come with inherited position. Minjun shifted uncomfortably beside her. Eomeonim, perhaps we could... I'm simply getting to know our guest, Minjuna, understanding her background, her commitments. She turned back to Naledi. Tell me, dear, what does your family think of your extended stay in Seoul? They're concerned about my being so far from home. I imagine they are, especially given the circumstances of your departure. The words dropped into the silence like stones into still water. Naledi felt her breath catch, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. I don't understand what you mean, Sejong-nim. Don't you? Chairwoman Kang leaned forward slightly, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Because I have here some very interesting information about a Miss Naledi Mthembu, who was engaged to be married to Mr. Mandla Zulu of Johannesburg, a prominent businessman from a respected Zulu family, and who disappeared 3 days before the traditional wedding ceremonies were to begin. The room seemed to tilt around Naledi. Minjun stared at his mother in shock, clearly as surprised by this revelation as she was by its public exposure. Eomeonim, he said, his voice carefully controlled. This is inappropriate. What's inappropriate is bringing a woman into this family without full disclosure of her commitments elsewhere. The chairwoman produced a folder from beside her place setting. I also have documentation showing that the Zulu family paid a substantial bride price, 100,000 rand, which was accepted by Miss Mthembu's father. That wasn't my agreement, Naledi whispered, her voice barely audible. Wasn't it? Because according to my sources, both families announced the engagement publicly. The bride price was paid and accepted. Gifts were exchanged. In many cultures, including my own, such arrangements constitute binding agreements regardless of the bride's personal feelings. The attack was surgical in its precision. Not only was Chairwoman Kang exposing Naledi's flight from an arranged marriage, she was reframing it as theft, the acceptance of bride price followed by abandonment of contractual obligations. You investigated her, Minjun said, his voice tight with controlled fury. I investigate everyone who enters our family's sphere of influence. It's a responsibility that comes with protecting generational wealth and reputation. She turned back to Naledi. The question now is what we do with this information. What do you want? Naledi asked, abandoning all pretense of the careful politeness Ginny had drilled into her. I want honesty. About your relationship with my son, about your intentions, about whether this is a genuine romance or a convenient arrangement to solve your visa problems. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the traditional Korean house seemed to close in, its beautiful wooden architecture becoming a cage of cultural expectations and family obligations. Does it matter? Naledi asked quietly. Whether it's real or convenient? In the end, we're all just playing the roles that serve our family's interests. Careful, child. You're speaking to someone who has spent 40 years playing those roles successfully. And what has it cost you? The question slipped out before Naledi could stop it, born of frustration and fear, and the desperate need to push back against the psychological pressure. The chairwoman's eyes flashed with something dangerous. More than you could understand. But also less than it cost me to secure my family's position in a world that would have devoured us otherwise. She stood from the table with fluid grace. I have a proposition for you, Miss Mthembu. Return to South Africa. Honor your commitments to the Zulu family. In exchange, I will ensure your departure from Seoul is financially comfortable, enough to establish yourself independently, free from family obligations. And if I don't, then we continue this charade until it inevitably collapses under the weight of its own contradictions, and when it does, the damage to my family's reputation will require compensation. The threat was clear: comply or be destroyed. As they left the estate, driving through Seoul's neon-lit streets in heavy silence, Naledi finally understood the true nature of the world she'd entered. This wasn't just about love or money or visa status. This was about power. Who had it, who wanted it, and what they were willing to sacrifice to get it. "I'm sorry," Minjun said finally. "I had no idea she'd investigated your background so thoroughly." "You didn't know about the engagement?" "No, but..." He paused. "It doesn't change anything between us, doesn't it? Because now your mother has ammunition to destroy me whenever she chooses, and she's made it clear that she will choose eventually. We'll find a way to..." "There is no we, Minjun. There's a contract with an expiration date, and two people trying to survive until it ends." But even as she said the words, Naledi wasn't sure she believed them anymore. Because somewhere between the charity gala and the shared insomnia and the quiet conversations over tea, the boundaries between performance and reality had begun to blur. And that, she was beginning to realize, was the most dangerous development of all. The Seoul Arts Center's red carpet gleamed under a canopy of umbrellas as October rain drummed overhead with relentless intensity. Naledi adjusted her emerald gown, another Jin Eye selection that hugged her body like liquid silk, and tried to project confidence as they navigated the gauntlet of photographers and entertainment reporters. "Kang Minjun-si, tell us about your relationship. How serious are things between you two? Miss Mithembu, what attracted you to Korea's most eligible bachelor?" Minjun's hand rested possessively on her lower back as he guided her through the chaos with practiced ease. His public smile was perfect, warm enough to seem genuine, controlled enough to maintain authority, but she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. "One photo by the entrance," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Then we escape inside." But as they posed beside the art center's iconic columns, a reporter from KBS shouted a question that made both their blood freeze. "Miss Mithembu, is it true you're in Seoul illegally on an expired visa?" The camera flashes intensified, strobing like lightning. Minjun's arm tightened protectively around her waist as the media scented blood in the water. "No comment," Jeannie interjected smoothly, materializing beside them with the efficiency of a practiced crisis manager. "Are you using Minjun to avoid deportation? What about the fiancé you abandoned in South Africa?" The questions came like machine gun fire, each one designed to crack her composure. Naledi felt her carefully constructed public persona beginning to crumble as the chairwoman's investigation bore its poisonous fruit. "Miss Mithembu, did you steal money from your previous engagement? Is this relationship real, or is it immigration fraud?" The world tilted around her. Every nightmare she'd had about public exposure was manifesting in real time, broadcast to millions of Korean viewers who would judge her without context or compassion. Minjun turned to face her, his eyes blazing with something between fury and protection. The cameras caught the movement, hungry for any gesture that might reveal the truth behind their carefully orchestrated romance. "Trust me," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the media storm. Before she could respond, his lips captured hers in a kiss that silenced every camera, every question, every doubt. It was meant for show, a bold deflection from the scandal brewing around them, a public declaration that their relationship was strong enough to weather any storm. But the kiss became something else entirely. His mouth was warm and demanding, tasting of coffee and determination, and something indefinably masculine that made her knees weak. her hands fisted in his lapels as he pulled her closer, rain misting around them like a blessing from the soul sky. The world contracted to just this moment, this connection, this impossible truth that neither of them had planned or expected. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. The media had gone completely silent, photographers frantically capturing what looked like the most romantic moment of the decade. "Any other questions?" Minjun asked the stunned crowd, his voice deadly calm despite the storm raging in his dark eyes. The reporters parted like the Red Sea as they walked into the building, but Naledi barely noticed. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, her heart raced with adrenaline and confusion, and something that felt dangerously close to genuine desire. "That was," she started once they were safely inside the art center's elegant lobby. "Necessary," he finished, but his voice carried uncertainty. The media needed to see something convincing. Right, convincing. But neither of them acknowledged the truth hanging between them like suspended lightning. The kiss that was supposed to be fake had felt more real than anything either had experienced in years. The exhibition opening continued around them, Seoul's cultural elite mingling among priceless artworks, conversations flowing between Korean and English with the fluid ease of international sophistication. But Naledi felt disconnected from it all. Her awareness focused entirely on the man beside her who had just turned their carefully professional arrangement into something infinitely more complicated. "The chairwoman is here." Jin-ae appeared at their elbow, her voice tense with warning. Across the gallery, Chairwoman Kang moved through the crowd like a shark among minnows, her traditional hanbok making her look both elegant and predatory. She paused at various artworks, engaging in polite conversation with other collectors, but her eyes never stopped tracking her son and his supposed girlfriend. "She's evaluating," Minjun observed, "watching how we interact, looking for cracks in the performance." "And did she find any?" Naledi asked, still shaken by the intensity of their kiss. "I don't know. Did she?" The question carried weight far beyond its simple words. They were both aware that something had shifted between them. Some boundary had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The contract had specified public displays of affection, but it hadn't prepared them for what would happen when those displays stopped feeling like acting. "Mr. Kang! Miss Mathembu!" Park Woo-jin materialized beside them with his characteristic timing, a champagne flute in one hand and a predatory smile on his face. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his gold cufflinks catching the gallery's artful lighting. "Such a passionate display outside," he said conversationally. "Very convincing. Though I have to wonder, was it convincing enough?" "What do you mean?" Naledi asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Oh, just that public affection is easy to stage. Real intimacy is much harder to fake." His eyes glittered with malicious amusement. "Though I suppose we'll find out soon enough how deep this relationship really goes." "Is that a threat?" Minjun's voice carried warning. "It's an observation. You see, I've been following the media coverage of your romance with great interest, and I've noticed some inconsistencies in the timeline." He produced his phone with theatrical flair. "For instance, this photograph was taken 3 weeks before you supposedly met Miss Mathembu at that charming cafe. Quite the coincidence, don't you think?" The image on his screen made Naledi's stomach drop. Herself, walking out of the Korean immigration office, looking frustrated and defeated. The timestamp showed the date clearly, weeks before their supposed first encounter. Curious that a woman would visit immigration services so extensively before meeting the man who would solve all her visa problems, Woo-jin continued, almost as if she knew she'd need Korean sponsorship soon. "You've been following me," Naledi breathed. I've been protecting Korean business interests from potential fraud. There's a difference. The accusation hung in the gallery's refined air like toxic gas. Around them, Seoul's art enthusiasts continued their elegant conversations, oblivious to the corporate warfare being waged among the abstract paintings. "What do you want?" Min-jun asked bluntly. "What I've always wanted. Transparency, honesty, and recognition that some relationships are built on mutual benefit rather than mutual affection." Woo-jin's smile never wavered, though I must say that kiss outside was quite theatrical. "You should consider careers in performance art." Before either of them could respond, he melted back into the crowd, leaving them standing among priceless artworks while their carefully constructed world began to crumble around them. "He knows," Naledi whispered. "He suspects." "That's different." "Is it?" "Because right now it feels like everyone in Seoul can see through this charade except us." Min-jun took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, in a gesture that looked romantic, but felt like a lifeline. "Then maybe it's time we stopped thinking of it as a charade." The admission hung between them, dangerous and thrilling and terrifying in its implications. Around them, Seoul's elite continued their cultural appreciation, unaware that two lives were quietly imploding among the abstract expressions of human emotion. But in the corner of the gallery, a photographer from Seoul's most notorious gossip magazine captured the moment their hands joined, the intimate way they leaned toward each other, the obvious tension that couldn't be faked or bought or contracted. By morning, the photographs would be everywhere, and Park Woo-jin would have all the ammunition he needed to destroy them both. Jinhae's office at 2 a.m. resembled a war room more than a corporate workspace. Files covered every surface, multiple computer screens glowed with open databases, and empty coffee cups formed a caffeinated shrine to sleepless investigation. The executive assistant moved between screens with methodical precision, her delicate glasses reflecting the harsh light as she built a case that could save or destroy everything. Naledi knocked softly before entering. "You're working late. Someone has to protect him." Jinhee didn't look up from her computer. "The media coverage from tonight's art opening is already turning negative. 3 major outlets are questioning the authenticity of your relationship. Because Park Woo-jin is feeding them information. Because Park Woo-jin has information to feed them." Jinhae finally faced her, exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. "Your background check came back clean officially, but someone with serious resources has been digging much deeper." Naledi sank into the leather chair across from the desk. "How deep?" "Deep enough to know about your visa applications, your teaching permits, your financial situation when you arrived in Seoul." Jinhae pulled up a series of documents on her screen. "Someone has been building a comprehensive profile of you for months." "Months? But I only met Min-jun a week ago." "Did you?" Jinhae's fingers flew across the keyboard. "Because according to these surveillance records, someone has been tracking your movements since you first arrived in Korea." The evidence was damning in its thoroughness. Photographs of Naledi at various locations around Seoul, time-stamped and cataloged with professional precision. Her apartment building, the school where she taught, even the cafe where she'd supposedly met Min-jun by accident. "This is impossible," Naledi breathed. "Nothing is impossible when you have enough money and motivation." Jinhae leaned back in her chair. "The question is who's behind it, and what they ultimately want. Park Woo-jin, obviously. Park Woo-jin is the obvious choice. But the funding for this level of surveillance comes from somewhere much more sophisticated." Jinhae pulled up financial records. Shell companies, offshore accounts, professional investigation services that typically work for intelligence agencies or major corporations. A chill ran down Naledi's spine. "You're talking about the chairwoman." I'm talking about someone with the resources to orchestrate a months-long operation designed to manipulate Minjun's personal life for strategic advantage. They stared at the evidence in horrified silence. The implications were staggering. Naledi's arrival in Seoul, her financial difficulties, even her accidental encounter with Minjun, all of it potentially orchestrated by someone playing a game far more complex than simple corporate politics. Why? Naledi asked quietly. Why go to such elaborate lengths? Control. Minjun has been resisting his mother's marriage arrangements for years. Maybe someone decided to create an arrangement he couldn't resist. A damsel in distress. A convenient solution to both their problems. A relationship that looks natural, but can be controlled. And when it serves its purpose, then it's destroyed. Minjun is left vulnerable, and the real marriage negotiations can begin. Jinae's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced at the screen and paled visibly. What is it? Security footage from the hotel where you first met Minjun. Someone requested copies 3 days before your accident. The room felt like it was closing in. 3 days before? Which means someone knew you would be there. Someone arranged for you to stumble into Minjun's path at exactly the right moment. The revelation hit Naledi like a physical blow. Every choice she'd made, every decision that had led her to Seoul and into Minjun's world, all of it potentially manipulated by forces she'd never seen or suspected. We need to tell him, she said. Do we? Because right now, Minjun believes he chose to help you. He believes this relationship, fake or not, was his decision. What happens when he discovers he's been as manipulated as you have? It was a question neither of them wanted to answer. Minjun's entire identity was built on control, on being the master of his own destiny, despite the weight of family expectations. Learning that even his rebellion had been orchestrated might break something fundamental in him. There's more, Jinae said quietly. The investigation into your background didn't stop with public records. Someone has been in contact with your family in South Africa. What do you mean? Phone calls, emails, requests for information about your departure, your relationship status, your commitment to previous engagements. The implications were terrifying. If someone had been feeding information to the chairwoman about her engagement to Mandla, it meant her family's privacy had been violated, their trust potentially exploited. Who would do this? Someone who understands that the best way to control people is to know everything about them. Jinae closed her laptop with deliberate care, and someone who's been planning this for a very long time. A soft knock at the office door interrupted them. Minjun entered without waiting for permission, his hair disheveled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He looked like a man who'd been wrestling with impossible decisions. I couldn't sleep, he said simply, and I saw the lights on. Jinae and Naledi exchanged glances. How much should they tell him? How much could he handle learning about the manipulation that had brought them together? We were just reviewing tomorrow's media strategy, Jinae said diplomatically. Don't lie to me. Minjun's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through deception. I can see the surveillance photos on your screen. I can see the financial records. What have you discovered? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jinae looked at Naledi, silently asking whether she was prepared for the conversation that would change everything. Someone has been orchestrating this, Naledi said quietly. Your meeting with me, my presence in Seoul, possibly even my decision to leave South Africa. We think someone has been manipulating both of us. Minjun stared at them for a long moment, processing the implications. Then, to their surprise, he laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. Of course they have. I should have realized it earlier. You're not angry. I'm furious, but not at you. He moved to stand beside Jinae's desk, studying the evidence they'd compiled. I'm angry at myself for believing I could outsmart a system that's been controlling my life since birth. What do we do now? Naledi asked. Minjun was quiet for a moment, his analytical mind working through possibilities and consequences. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the cold determination that had built his business empire. Now we turn the tables. If someone wants to play puppet master, let's show them what happens when the puppets cut their own strings. But as the three of them began planning their counterattack, none of them noticed the small recording device hidden in Jinae's office plant, a device that had been transmitting their every word to a listener who was already 3 moves ahead in a game they were only beginning to understand. The envelope arrived at Naledi's apartment building at exactly 7 a.m., delivered by a courier who vanished into Seoul's morning rush before the security cameras could capture a clear image. Inside the unmarked manila folder, her world collapsed into glossy 8x10 photographs that made her hands shake. Her family's house in Durban, her youngest sister walking to school, her grandmother tending the garden where she'd taught Naledi about traditional Zulu beadwork, all captured with telephoto precision, all marked with red circles like targets. The accompanying note was typed on expensive paper. Your Korean fairy tale is charming, but South Africa misses you. Perhaps it's time to come home. You have 72 hours to end this charade publicly, or your family's safety becomes uncertain. Naledi sank onto her couch, photographs scattered across the coffee table like evidence of a crime she hadn't committed. Someone had not only investigated her background, they'd escalated to international surveillance of her family, turning the people she loved most into weapons against her. Her phone rang. Unknown international number. Hello, Naledi. The voice was smooth, speaking English with a slight Korean accent. I trust you received our care package. Who is this? Someone who understands the weight of family obligations. Your grandmother looks well for her age, doesn't she? Though those morning walks to the market could become hazardous if the proper arrangements aren't made. Ice filled her veins. This wasn't corporate maneuvering or social pressure. This was a direct threat against innocent people who had no connection to Korean business politics. If you touch them, I'm trying to reunite you with them. All you need to do is end this media circus with Minjun. Publicly, dramatically. A tearful confession about visa fraud should suffice. Why? What do you gain from destroying my relationship? The same thing I gain from preventing unsuitable marriages, protection of family interests and traditional values. The voice carried a cold satisfaction. You're an obstacle, Miss Mthembu. A complication that needs to be resolved before it becomes permanent. And if I comply? Then you return to Johannesburg with enough money to live comfortably, your family remains safe, and everyone involved maintains their dignity. And if I don't? Then your family's morning routines become significantly more dangerous. South Africa has such high crime rates, doesn't it? Unfortunate things happen to people who walk alone. The line went dead, leaving Naledi staring at photographs of her family going about their daily lives, unaware they'd become pawns in a game played thousands of miles away. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of panic. Minjun stood in her doorway holding 2 cups of chamomile tea, his expression shifting to alarm when he saw her face. What's wrong? She quickly swept the photographs into the envelope, but not before he caught a glimpse of her sister's school uniform, her grandmother's weathered hands. Naledi, what's in the envelope? His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through deception. With trembling hands, she spread the photographs across her coffee table like a confession. Minjun studied each image with the methodical precision he brought to corporate crises. but she could see the fury building behind his controlled exterior. When she recounted the phone call, his jaw tightened with barely contained rage. "They're using your family as leverage," he said quietly. "International surveillance, coordinated threats. This isn't amateur hour. What do I do?" Her voice broke on the question. "I can't put them in danger because of this fake relationship. It's not fake anymore." The words came out sharper than he intended. "What we have, whatever this has become, it's real enough that someone is willing to commit international crimes to stop it." He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Jin-ae, I need you here now. Emergency protocols, and contact Detective Kim Soo-jin. Tell her we need to discuss international criminal conspiracy. Min-jun, you can't involve the police. If they're watching my family, then we make sure your family is protected before we move against whoever's threatening them." He sat beside her on the couch, his hand covering hers. "I won't let them hurt the people you love." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if memorizing every detail. "Because somewhere between the fake contract and the real kisses, I fell in love with you. Actually, completely, dangerously in love with you." The admission hung between them like suspended lightning. Outside, Seoul continued its relentless pace. But in her small apartment, time seemed to stop. "Min-jun, I know it's not part of the arrangement. I know it complicates everything. But I'm not going to let anyone, not Park Woo-jin, not my mother, not international criminals, destroy what we've found." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message that made her blood freeze. A new photograph of her sister, this one taken just hours ago, with a timestamp showing Seoul's current time zone. "We can reach them anywhere, anytime. 60 hours remaining." The private dining room at Jungsik sparkled with understated elegance, as Seoul's autumn rain painted intricate patterns on the floor-to-ceiling windows. Naledi adjusted her pearl necklace, another loan from Jin-ae's seemingly endless collection of appropriate accessories, and tried to calm her racing heart. Tonight wasn't just dinner. It was psychological warfare disguised as family bonding. Chairwoman Kang arrived at precisely 7 o'clock, her dark hanbok making her look like an empress holding court. Park Woo-jin followed 3 steps behind. Invited, Min-jun had explained through gritted teeth, because business and pleasure could never be fully separated in their world. "Now ladies see." Woo-jin smiled, his gold cufflinks catching the candlelight as he raised his soju glass. "You look radiant tonight. Love certainly suits you." The compliment felt like a silk-wrapped blade. Under the table, Min-jun's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with practiced ease. But instead of comfort, the gesture reminded her of the photographs hidden in her apartment, the threatening voice, the countdown clock ticking toward her family's destruction. "Thank you, Park-si," she managed. "Tell us about your teaching, dear," Chairwoman Kang said, delicately selecting a piece of perfectly prepared bulgogi. "Education is so important for cultural exchange. I love working with the students. They're eager to learn about the world beyond Korea. The world beyond Korea." The chairwoman's smile was sharp as winter wind. "How fascinating that you encouraged them to look elsewhere when you yourself ran here to escape your own world." The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Min-jun's grip on her hand tightened protectively. "Mother, it's all right," Naledi said quietly, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Sejongnim is right. I did run away. From an arranged marriage that would have been a cage. From family expectations that would have destroyed who I am. From a life where my choices didn't matter. Woo Jin leaned forward, his eyes glittering with predatory interest. "And what did you find instead?" She looked at Min-jun, his protective anger, his tired eyes, the way he held her hand like she might disappear if he let go. But beneath the surface performance, she saw something that made her chest tighten with genuine emotion. "I found someone who sees me," she said softly. "Not as a solution to his problems or a trophy for his collection, but as a person worth knowing. Someone who makes chamomile tea taste like hope and turns insomnia into shared solitude." The honesty in her voice surprised everyone at the table, including herself. Chairwoman Kang set down her chopsticks with surgical precision. Pretty words. But what happens when the novelty fades? When your visa expires? When reality intrudes on this romance? Before Naledi could answer, her phone buzzed with a text that made her blood freeze. "Your sister's school ends at 3 p.m. Johannesburg time. Beautiful uniform. 58 hours remaining." But at that exact moment, Min-jun raised their joined hands to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender, so unexpectedly genuine, that for a heartbeat she forgot about the threats, the manipulation, the impossible situation closing around them. "Reality," he said, looking directly at his mother, "is that some connections transcend convenience. Some relationships are worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Even when that cost includes family reputation, corporate stability, generational wealth. Especially then." His voice carried a conviction that surprised them all. Because what's the point of building an empire if you're too afraid to live in it authentically? The dinner continued around them. Polite conversation about art, politics, the changing seasons. But beneath the surface, a war was being waged. Every glance between Park Woo-jin and the chairwoman spoke of coordinated strategy. Every protective gesture from Min-jun toward Naledi revealed the depth of feelings that had grown far beyond their original contract. And every buzz of Naledi's phone reminded her that the people she loved most were being used as weapons in a battle she'd never asked to fight. As they prepared to leave, Chairwoman Kang cornered her near the restaurant's entrance. "You care for him," she said quietly. "I can see it in your eyes, in the way you look at him when you think no one is watching." "Yes," Naledi admitted, "I do." "Then end this before it destroys him. Love is a luxury my family cannot afford, especially not love built on lies and desperation. What if it's not built on lies anymore?" The chairwoman studied her for a long moment. "Then God help you both, because the forces aligned against you will show no mercy to inconvenient love affairs." As they drove back through Seoul's neon-lit streets, Naledi made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't protect her family by running, couldn't save Min-jun by lying, and couldn't preserve their relationship by hiding from the truth. It was time to stop being a victim of other people's games. It was time to fight back. The Kang Industries building hummed with after-hours productivity, its glass facade reflecting Seoul's neon constellation. Janae's office glowed like a beacon 40 floors above the street, where she worked through her 4th consecutive sleepless night, building a case that could save or destroy everything they'd fought for. Min-jun found her hunched over multiple computer screens, empty coffee cups forming defensive walls around her workspace. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her designer glasses smudged with exhaustion. "Go home, Ginny. Someone has to monitor the media response to tonight's dinner. The photos of you and Naledi are trending across social platforms, but the narrative is shifting." She didn't look up from her screens. Park Woo-jin's people are seeding stories about immigration fraud, family abandonment, unsuitable foreign influences. Min-jun studied her with the sharp attention he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. "When did you last sleep? Sleep is overrated. She closed one laptop with deliberate care. Unlike some people, I don't have someone to make me chamomile tea and share the darkness with. The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence filled the office like spilled wine. Dark, spreading, impossible to clean. Jinae? 7 years, she said quietly, finally meeting his eyes. 7 years I've been waiting for you to see me as more than your executive assistant, more than your buffer against your mother's marriage schemes, more than the woman who manages your life so efficiently you never have to think about the pieces that hold it together. Her voice remained steady, professional, even as her carefully constructed world cracked apart. When you brought Naledi to that first meeting, when you looked at her like she was oxygen and you'd been suffocating, I knew. She managed a smile that was heartbreaking in its sincerity. I knew my 7 years of hoping had been wasted on a man who could fall completely in love in 7 days. Minjun moved closer, his expression stricken. You never meant to hurt me. I know. She gathered her files with mechanical precision. You never meant anything at all. That was the problem. You're more important to me than anyone except her. Jinae stood, adjusting her blazer with the same careful attention she brought to every aspect of her professional life. It's all right, Minjun. I've watched you transform these past weeks. The insomnia lifting. The way you smile when you think no one is watching. The way you check your phone whenever she texts. She paused at the door. I've been protecting you for so long, I forgot to protect myself. But watching you love someone, really love someone, I'm happy for you, even if it's killing me. Ginny, wait. His voice stopped her before she could leave. There's something you need to know. About the investigation, about how this all started. She turned back, her professional instincts overriding her personal pain. What do you mean? The background checks you ran on Naledi. They weren't the first ones. Someone has been investigating her for months, long before we met. Someone orchestrated our entire relationship. Jinae's expression sharpened with analytical focus. Show me. For the next hour, they worked side by side as they had for 7 years, but with a new undercurrent of honesty. The evidence was damning. Coordinated surveillance, strategic information leaks, financial manipulation that had driven Naledi toward desperation and Minjun toward a convenient solution. It's sophisticated, Jinae admitted. Corporate-level planning with international reach. Someone with serious resources wanted you two together, at least initially. And now they want us apart. No. She studied the timeline more carefully. Now they want you destroyed. Both of you. This isn't about preventing a relationship anymore. It's about using the relationship to eliminate you from the corporate succession entirely. The revelation hit him like cold water. You're saying this was never about love or marriage arrangements. I'm saying someone has been playing a much longer game. Get you emotionally invested in an unsuitable woman, expose the relationship as fraud, destroy your credibility with the board, and clear the path for alternative leadership. Park Woo-jin, or whoever's been backing him. Jinae pulled up financial records. These investigation costs, the international surveillance, the coordinated media campaign, we're talking about millions of dollars in operational expenses. That's not individual ambition, Minjun. That's institutional conspiracy. Before he could respond, both their phones chimed simultaneously with the same emergency alert. Breaking. Kang Industries. CEO's fake romance exposed. Immigration fraud investigation launched. The story was already live on 3 major networks, complete with documentation, expert commentary, and grainy surveillance footage that made their private moments look sordid and calculated. They're moving fast. Jinhye observed, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. This isn't just media manipulation. This is a coordinated assault designed to force immediate action. How long do we have? Before the board calls an emergency meeting? Maybe 18 hours. Before your mother demands answers? Probably 18 minutes. As if summoned by their conversation, the elevator chimed. Chairwoman Kang emerged like an elegant storm, her traditional hanbok replaced by a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. "Explain," she said without preamble, "how my son became the star of an immigration fraud scandal that's currently trending on international news." But before either of them could answer, Jinhye's computer screen flashed with an urgent security alert. Someone was attempting to access the building's executive floors using Minjun's access codes. "That's impossible," he said. "I'm the only one with those codes." "Not anymore." Jinhye's face went pale as she read the security logs. "Someone cloned your access credentials 3 days ago. They've been coming and going from this building at will." The implications were staggering. Corporate espionage, identity theft, security breaches that could compromise every aspect of Kang Industries' operations. And somewhere in the building, their enemy was making their final move. The headlines erupted across Seoul's media landscape like digital wildfire at dawn. Fake romance exposed. Billionaire CEO's immigration scam. Love or lies. Inside the contract relationship fooling Korea. Kang Industries' stock plummets as romance scandal unfolds. Naledi's phone buzzed incessantly as she sat frozen in Minjun's penthouse living room, watching her carefully constructed life dissected across every news channel. The leaked contract, their signed agreement with all its clinical clauses, filled television screens with devastating precision. Her apartment door burst open. Minjun stood there, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from running through Seoul's morning downpour. "Did you—" He stopped when he saw her face, recognizing immediately that she was as shocked as he was. "You didn't leak it. How can you be sure?" "Because you look like someone just set your world on fire." He crossed to her, his hands framing her face with desperate gentleness. "Naledi, I know you didn't do this." The television droned on behind them. Expert commentators analyzing their every public appearance, their body language, their financial motivations. A relationship that had felt increasingly real was being reduced to cold transaction and calculated deception. Her phone rang. The same unknown number from before. "Answer it," Minjun said grimly. "Put it on speaker." "Congratulations," the smooth voice said without preamble. "Korea's most famous fake couple. Though I must say, the acting has been quite convincing these past weeks." "What do you want?" Minjun demanded, his arm tightening protectively around Naledi's shoulders. "Ah, the CEO joins us. How intimate." "I want exactly what's happening. Your reputation in ruins, your stock prices falling, your relationship exposed as the fraud it began as. Who are you?" "Someone who understands that some people are worth more destroyed than built up." The voice carried cold satisfaction. "The contract termination papers are being drawn up as we speak. Sign them, announce the mutual end of your business arrangement, and this ends here." "And if we don't?" Naledi asked, though she already knew the answer. "Your family in Johannesburg has such beautiful morning walks. It would be unfortunate if those walks became dangerous. You now have 36 hours remaining." The line went dead, leaving them in the devastating silence of Minjun's penthouse. Outside, Seoul pulsed with its relentless energy, but inside, their world was collapsing with methodical precision. "We'll figure this out," Minjun whispered into her hair, but his voice carried uncertainty for the first time since she'd known him. "No." She pulled back, her eyes bright with tears and terrible resolve. We can't figure this out, because they're right about one thing. It did start as a fraud, and now people I love are paying the price for lies I helped create. Those lies became something real. Did they? Or did we just convince ourselves they were real because it was easier than admitting we were both using each other? The words tasted bitter, but she forced herself to say them. You needed a shield against your mother's marriage plans. I needed visa stability. Everything else was just good acting. That's not true, and you know it. Do I? Because right now I can't tell the difference between what was performed and what was genuine. Before he could respond, the elevator chimed. Janae emerged carrying her laptop and wearing the expression of someone delivering a terminal diagnosis. The board has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon, she announced without preamble. 3 major shareholders are demanding explanations. The Korea Immigration Service has opened a formal investigation, and Park Woo-jin just announced his engagement to Chairwoman Kim's daughter, positioning himself as the stable, traditional alternative to your complicated personal life. How bad is it? Min-jun asked. Stock prices are down 18% in 3 hours. 2 international partners have suspended contract negotiations pending resolution of the scandal, and the corporate media is calling for your resignation. Janae turned to Naledi with something approaching sympathy in her eyes. There's more. Someone leaked information about your family situation in South Africa. The story now includes details about the bride price, the abandoned engagement, the financial motivations for leaving. Naledi's stomach dropped. They know about Mandla. They know everything. The marriage arrangement, your father's debts, the money your family received and never returned. It's being framed as a pattern of using relationships for financial gain. The systematic destruction was breathtaking in its completeness. Every private shame, every desperate choice, every moment of vulnerability, all weaponized and broadcast to a nation that would judge her without context or compassion. What do we do? She asked quietly. Min-jun was quiet for a long moment, his analytical mind working through possibilities and consequences. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the cold determination that had built his business empire. We fight back, but not the way they expect. What do you mean? I mean we stop playing defense. We stop reacting to their moves and start making our own. He turned to Ginny. Call Detective Kim. Tell her we're ready to discuss international conspiracy, corporate espionage, and criminal threats against foreign nationals. Min-jun, Naledi protested. If we involve the police, then we make sure your family is protected first. I have security contacts in Johannesburg, people who can ensure your family's safety while we deal with the source of the threats. And what about us? What about the contract, the relationship, the scandal? He moved to stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows, soul spreading below him like a chessboard where he'd been playing defense for too long. We tell the truth, all of it. How we met, why we entered the arrangement, what it became, and who's been manipulating us from the beginning. That will destroy your reputation completely. Maybe, or maybe it will destroy theirs. He turned back to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. Not the careful calculation of a corporate strategist, but the raw determination of a man fighting for something that mattered more than money or power or social standing. Are you willing to risk everything? He asked quietly. Naledi thought about her family in Johannesburg, about the students she taught, about the life she'd built from nothing in a foreign country. She thought about the man standing before her, complicated, wounded, but genuine in ways that transcended their original arrangement. Yes, she said finally, but only if we do it together. Together, he agreed. But what neither of them saw was Park Woo-jin in the building across the street, watching their reunion through high-powered binoculars while recording everything for the final phase of his plan. Some victories, he'd learned, were won not through direct assault, but through allowing your enemies to destroy themselves. The penthouse bar in Gangnam's most exclusive tower overlooked Seoul like a predator surveying its hunting ground. Park Woo-jin swirled his 20-year-old whiskey, watching multiple news screens display his carefully orchestrated chaos, while classical music played softly in the background. His phone buzzed. Chairwoman Kang's photo illuminated the screen. "Is it done?" Her voice was sharp with impatience and something that might have been regret. "The contract is exposed. Stock prices are falling. Public opinion has shifted completely." He smiled at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Your son's reputation won't survive this level of scandal. And the girl, being handled separately. My contact in Johannesburg is quite persuasive, though I must say, she's proven more resilient than expected." Woo-jin. Her voice carried a warning that made him pause mid-sip. "I wanted them separated, not destroyed. If physical harm comes to her family..." "Relax, Chairwoman. No one will be hurt. Scared, yes. Inconvenienced, certainly. But actual violence is so crude." He finished his whiskey with satisfaction. Fear is much more effective than brutality, and far easier to deny later. The board meeting is in 6 hours, with Min Jun's judgment questioned, his leadership compromised. "You'll have no choice but to install me as interim CEO until a suitable permanent replacement can be found." He poured another drink, savoring the moment. "Though I suspect the permanent replacement conversation will be quite brief." A long pause. "You understand this arrangement requires certain commitments from you. Marriage to your goddaughter Kim So-young. Traditional ceremony, appropriate family connections, suitable heirs within 3 years." His reflection smiled back at him. "I understand perfectly. Though I must admit, I'll miss the intellectual challenge of outmaneuvering Miss Mthembu. Remarkable woman. Wrong circumstances. She was never right for this family. Perhaps not, but she was certainly right for Min Jun." He pulled up the surveillance footage from their penthouse conversation earlier. "Did you see the way he defended her? The way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching? That wasn't acting, Chairwoman. Love is a luxury we cannot afford. Business is necessity." "Indeed." Woo-jin raised his glass to Seoul's glittering skyline. "Fortunately, some of us understand the difference between personal desires and strategic requirements." After ending the call, he opened his laptop and began reviewing the final phase of his operation. The press release announcing his engagement was already drafted, timed for maximum impact during the afternoon news cycle. The board meeting agenda prioritized leadership stability and family values in corporate governance. Even the seating arrangements had been designed to isolate Min Jun from his traditional allies. But the masterstroke would be the revelation he'd saved for last. Evidence that would eliminate any possibility of Min Jun's recovery from this scandal. His secure phone chimed with an encrypted message from his Johannesburg contact. Package delivered. Family cooperation secured. Final deadline confirmed. Woo-jin allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. 3 years of planning, 6 months of execution, and now the Kang family empire would finally recognize his true value. Min Jun's romantic rebellion would become the catalyst for necessary change. His celebration was interrupted by an urgent call from his head of security. "Sir, we have a problem. The targets are moving faster than anticipated." "What do you mean?" Kang Min-jun just retained Seoul's top criminal defense attorney. They've also contacted international security consultants and what appears to be a private investigation firm specializing in corporate espionage. Woo Jin set down his whiskey, his casual confidence replaced by sharp attention. When? 30 minutes ago. And sir, there's more. Someone accessed our secure communications from inside the Kang Industries building. They may have been monitoring our operations. The implications hit him like cold water. If Min-jun had discovered the extent of the conspiracy, if he could prove international coordination. Accelerate the timeline, Woo Jin ordered. I want the family situation in Johannesburg resolved within 12 hours. And prepare the emergency board resolution. We may need to move before the scheduled meeting. Sir, if we push too fast. If we don't push fast enough, we lose everything. He moved to his safe, withdrawing files that contained his nuclear option. Evidence that would destroy not just Min-jun, but potentially the entire Kang family legacy. Some wars require total victory, not strategic patience. As he prepared for the final battle, Woo Jin reflected on the irony of the situation. He'd engineered this entire scenario to demonstrate his superiority over Min-jun in every way that mattered. Strategic thinking, ruthless execution, understanding of what truly drove human behavior. But he'd made one critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that Min-jun's feelings for Naledi were just another weakness to be exploited. He'd never considered that they might become a source of strength powerful enough to tear down everything Woo Jin had built. As Seoul's lights twinkled below him, Park Woo Jin began implementing the plan that would either crown him king of Korea's largest conglomerate or destroy them all in the attempt. The game was entering its final phase, and he intended to win regardless of the cost. The typhoon hit Seoul with biblical fury, turning the city into a water world of howling wind and horizontal rain that transformed the metropolis into something unrecognizable. Naledi's apartment building swayed like a ship in a tempest as she packed her belongings with mechanical precision, each item placed in her suitcase feeling like a small death. One suitcase. The same suitcase she'd arrived with 6 months ago, when she'd thought the hardest thing she'd ever do was flee an arranged marriage in Johannesburg. Her plane ticket to South Africa lay on the coffee table beside unsigned contract termination papers that would legally end her relationship with Min-jun, and, she hoped, the threats against her family. Tomorrow's flight would close this chapter of her life and return her to the world she'd tried so desperately to escape. Thunder shook the windows as she folded her clothes. Each item felt like packing away a piece of her heart. The midnight blue dress from their first public appearance. The pearl necklace Jeannie had given her. The Korean language textbooks covered in her students' grateful messages. The photos of Seoul she'd taken during brief moments of happiness. A key turned in the lock. Min-jun stood in her doorway, soaked to the bone despite his expensive umbrella. His usually immaculate appearance disheveled from battling the storm. His eyes found the suitcase immediately, and something died in his expression. You're really leaving. The contract... Forget the contract. He stepped inside, water dripping from his coat onto her wooden floor. Is this what you want? To run back to a life you hated because someone threatened you? What I want doesn't matter. Not when people I love are in danger. People you love. He moved closer, and she could see the storm reflected in his dark eyes. What about me? The question hung between them like lightning waiting to strike. Outside, nature unleashed its fury on Seoul, but inside her small apartment, the most dangerous storm was the one building between two people who'd found something real in the middle of elaborate deception. What about you? Do you love me? His voice was raw, stripped of the corporate polish that usually armored his emotions. Not the contract Minjun, not the convenient boyfriend. Me. The insomniac who drinks too much chamomile tea and hasn't slept properly in years. The man who didn't know how to breathe until you stumbled into his world. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain the distance that might save them both. It doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters. He reached for her hands and she could feel them shaking. Because I love you. Not the arrangement, not the convenience, not the media narrative. You. Your laugh when my mother says something particularly cutting. The way you make insomnia feel like a choice instead of a curse. The way you wear your grandmother's necklace like armor against a world that doesn't understand your strength. Thunder crashed overhead, and the lights flickered ominously. I can't, she whispered. My family. Then we protect them together. We find who's threatening them. We stop running from this conspiracy, and we start fighting back. Rain lashed the windows like nature itself was weeping for their impossible situation. And if we can't win, if they're too powerful, too connected, too ruthless, then we'll face whatever comes together. He pulled her close, and she could feel his heart hammering against hers. But I won't let fear win. Not when I've finally found something worth fighting for. The storm raged around them, but in the circle of his arms, Naledi felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving South Africa. The possibility that she didn't have to face the world alone. There's something I need to tell you, she said against his chest. What? I fell in love with you too. Completely, terrifyingly, impossibly in love with you. She pulled back to meet his eyes. And that's why I have to leave. Because loving you has put everyone I care about in danger. No. Loving me has given us a reason to fight back against people who think they can manipulate us like game pieces. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. Naledi, what if we stopped reacting to their moves and started making our own? What do you mean? Before he could answer, both their phones chimed simultaneously with the same urgent alert. The message was from Jin A. Emergency. Building security compromised. Someone is in Minjun's office right now. They stared at each other, the implications crashing over them like the storm outside. Their enemy hadn't been content to wait for Naledi's departure. They were making their final move tonight, in the middle of the typhoon when security would be minimal and witnesses scarce. We have to go, Minjun said. It's a trap. Probably. But it's also our chance to catch them in the act. As they prepared to leave, Naledi made a decision that would change everything. She opened her suitcase and pulled out the one thing she'd planned to leave behind. A small digital recorder her father had given her for interviews with her English students. What's that for? Minjun asked. Insurance, she said grimly. If we're walking into a trap, let's make sure we get everything on record. The storm outside seemed to intensify as they left her apartment, as if Seoul itself was holding its breath for the confrontation that would determine not just their fate, but the future of one of Korea's most powerful families. But neither of them knew that Jin-ae's message hadn't come from Jin-ae at all, and that the real trap was far more elaborate than either of them could imagine. Dawn broke gray and wounded over Seoul. The typhoon's aftermath, leaving the city looking like a watercolor painting left too long in the rain. Naledi stood at Minjun's penthouse window, watching maintenance crews clear debris from the streets 40 stories below, while her heart made a decision her mind refused to accept. Her suitcase sat by the door, packed and ready. Minjun had fallen asleep on the couch. The first time in months he'd slept more than 4 hours without medication. His face was peaceful in genuine rest, younger somehow. The stress lines smoothed away by exhaustion and the temporary security of thinking they'd won their first real victory together. Last night's confrontation at Kang Industries had yielded more than they'd hoped. Park Woo-jin's security breach had been documented, his communications intercepted, his entire conspiracy exposed in real time. They'd finally had evidence, leverage, hope. But Naledi's phone had continued buzzing throughout the night with messages that stripped away every victory. New photos of her family, more specific threats, a countdown that had reached its final hours. She'd spent the pre-dawn darkness watching Min-jun breathe, memorizing the way his hair fell across his forehead, the way his hand reached for her even in sleep, the peaceful expression of a man who'd finally found something worth protecting. Her phone buzzed again. Final photo. Her youngest sister at her school gate, surrounded by men in a black car. Plane leaves in 4 hours. Be on it, or she doesn't make it home today. Naledi's hands shook as she deleted the message. She looked at Min-jun, still sleeping, still trusting that she'd be there when he woke to continue their fight together. Instead, she moved quietly to the marble-topped desk and began writing. Min-jun. Some storms are too big to weather together. Some prices are too high to pay, even for love. Thank you for teaching me that I could be seen, really seen by someone who mattered. That my insomnia could be shared instead of endured alone. That love doesn't always announce itself with lightning. Sometimes it grows quiet and steady, like chamomile tea at 3 a.m. Take care of yourself. Sleep well when you can. Find someone who doesn't bring danger to everyone she touches. Always yours, even in leaving. Naledi. She placed the letter beside him, along with her traditional Zulu necklace, the one piece of home she'd brought to Korea, now the one piece of Korea she'd leave behind. At Incheon Airport, she clutched her boarding pass with white knuckles while her phone rang incessantly with Min-jun's increasingly desperate calls. Around her, travelers moved with purpose and excitement toward new adventures, family reunions, business opportunities. She felt like she was walking toward her own execution. Final boarding call for flight KE471 to Johannesburg. The gate agent's voice cut through her spiral of regret and second-guessing. In 4 hours, she'd be on a plane back to South Africa, back to Mandla Zulu and the marriage arrangement she'd fled, back to a life that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. But her family would be safe. Her phone buzzed with one final text from the unknown number. Smart choice. Your sister will be home safely within the hour. As she approached the boarding gate, her phone rang again. Min-jun's name flashed on the screen, but she couldn't bear to hear his voice breaking as he realized what she'd done. She turned off the phone and handed her boarding pass to the gate agent. But as she stepped onto the jet bridge, she didn't notice Jin-ae emerging from behind a pillar near the gate. Her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, and her eyes blazing with the fury of someone who'd finally discovered the complete truth. The final battle was just beginning, and this time, Jeannie intended to finish it. Jin-ae's heels clicked like gunshots across the Kang Industries lobby as she strode toward the executive elevator, her laptop bag containing enough evidence to topple governments, never mind family dynasties. The emergency board meeting was already in session, called ostensibly to address the company's stock collapse and Min-jun's compromised leadership, but actually designed as Park Woo-jin's coronation ceremony. She burst through the conference room doors without knocking. 20 faces turned toward her. The most powerful board in Korean industry, presided over by Chairwoman Kang, in her position as largest shareholder. Min-jun sat at the head of the table, his eyes hollow with sleepless grief from Naledi's departure, while Park Woo-jin occupied the seat of honor at the chairwoman's right hand. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jin-ae said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade dipped in acid. But I have something the board needs to see before you vote on new leadership. Miss Oh, Chairwoman Kang's voice carried ice that could freeze Seoul's Han River. This is a closed session. It concerns corporate espionage, international conspiracy, and criminal threats against foreign nationals. Jin-ae connected her laptop to the presentation screen with movements precise as surgery. I think the board will find it illuminating. The first image filled the screen. Financial records showing suspicious transfers from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands to a Johannesburg-based private investigation firm. 3 weeks before Min-jun met Naledi Mthembu, Jin-ae began, her voice carrying the authority of 7 years' experience managing crises. Someone paid $50,000 to have her background investigated, her vulnerabilities mapped, her family situation documented in detail. Min-jun's face went pale as the implications sank in. What are you saying? I'm saying your chance meeting was orchestrated from the beginning. The next slide showed surveillance photos. Naledi's apartment building, her daily route to work, the cafe where they'd supposedly met by accident. Someone wanted you two to meet, fall for each other, and ultimately destroy each other. Park Woo-jin shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but his voice remained smooth as silk. This is speculation. This is evidence. Jin-ae's next slide showed bank records that made several board members gasp audibly. Payments to media outlets for targeted coverage, payments to immigration officials for information, payments to international security firms for what they euphemistically call family influence operations. The room erupted in murmurs of shock and dismay. Chairwoman Kang's composed facade cracked like expensive porcelain. But the most interesting payment, Jeannie continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting, was to a private military contractor in Johannesburg. $300,000 for what their invoice describes as asset protection and compliance assurance. The final slide showed financial records with Park Woo-jin's personal account information highlighted in red. The question isn't who wanted to destroy Min-jun's relationship, Jin-ae said quietly. The question is who benefited from creating it in the first place, nurturing it until it became real, then using that reality as a weapon to destroy two people who had the audacity to fall in love despite being manipulated. Park Woo-jin stood slowly, his calculated composure finally beginning to slip. You can't prove. I can prove all of it. Jin-ae's voice was deadly calm. Including the fact that you've been working with someone inside this family to manipulate Min-jun's personal life, destroy his credibility, and position yourself as the only suitable alternative for corporate leadership. All eyes turned to Chairwoman Kang, whose elegant demeanor was cracking under the weight of exposed secrets. There's more, Ginny continued, pulling up audio files. Recorded conversations between Park Woo-jin and his Johannesburg contact, discussing timeline acceleration, family pressure points, and contingency plans that include what they call permanent solutions to the Naledi problem. She played a snippet of audio that made the blood of everyone in the room run cold. If she doesn't comply voluntarily, we'll need to escalate the family situation. The sister is the pressure point. Young, vulnerable, easily isolated. Why and how isolated? Permanently if necessary. One foreign teacher's family tragedy won't even make Korean news. The conference room fell into stunned silence. Even the most hardened corporate veterans looked shaken by the casual discussion of murder as a business strategy. Min-jun stood slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury. You were going to kill her family. I was going to protect our business interests from foreign manipulation, Woo-jin replied, but his voice carried less conviction than before. By threatening innocent people, by turning love into a weapon, by treating human lives like expendable assets in your corporate acquisition strategy. The room erupted as board members realized they'd just witnessed evidence of international criminal conspiracy. But even as security moved to restrain Park Woo-jin, even as Chairwoman Kang collapsed into her chair with the weight of her complicity, Jin-ae was already moving toward the door. "Where are you going?" Min-jun called. "To the airport." she said without stopping. Naledi's plane doesn't leave for another hour, and she needs to know that her family is safe, that the threats were empty, that the only person who ever needed protection was Park Woo-jin, from the consequences of his own ambition. Because some victories weren't worth winning if the people you loved weren't there to share them. The Incheon Airport departure lounge felt like purgatory, a space between worlds where Naledi sat clutching her boarding pass and watching Korean families say goodbye with the kind of casual affection she'd thought she might never find for herself. Her phone had remained off since Minjun's first call. She couldn't bear to hear his voice breaking as he discovered her abandonment, couldn't risk her resolve crumbling at the sound of his confusion and hurt. Around her, travelers moved with purpose, businessmen rushing toward international opportunities, families heading toward long-awaited reunions, students returning home for holidays. Everyone belonged somewhere, was wanted somewhere, had people waiting for their arrival. Everyone except her. Final boarding call for flight KE471 to Johannesburg. She stood mechanically, shouldering her bag with movements that felt borrowed from someone else's life. The same bag she'd carried from South Africa 6 months ago, when she'd thought the hardest thing she'd ever do was flee an arranged marriage. How naive she'd been then. How impossibly, heartbreakingly naive. Naledi. The voice cut through the terminal's ambient noise like lightning through storm clouds. She turned, knowing she shouldn't, knowing it would shatter what remained of her carefully constructed resolve. Minjun ran toward her through the crowds, his usually perfect appearance disheveled beyond recognition, shirt wrinkled, hair wild, eyes blazing with something between desperation and fury. Ginny followed close behind, her laptop bag bouncing against her hip as she struggled to keep pace. "Don't get on that plane," he said, breathless as he reached her. "Please. I have to." "You know I have to." But even as she said the words, her heart was already breaking at the sight of him. "No, you don't." He pulled out his phone, showing her a trending news alert. Park Woo-jin, arrested in corporate conspiracy, international threats investigated. Her knees went weak as the implications sank in. What? Jin-ae found everything. The setup, the blackmail, the threats against your family. His eyes blazed with protective fury that took her breath away. "It's over, Naledi. They're safe. You're safe. But my visa. Kang Industries is sponsoring your permanent residence. Effective immediately." Jin-ae approached with official documents that looked impossibly official and wonderfully real. "Also, Seoul International School has offered you a department head position. Full benefits, housing allowance, and a salary that should more than cover regular visits home." Naledi stared at the papers, her vision blurring with tears she'd been holding back for days. "I don't understand." "The board voted," Minjun said softly, "unanimously, even my mother." His smile was rueful but genuine. "Apparently, nearly losing your son to international criminal conspiracy puts family politics in perspective." Around them, passengers streamed toward the boarding gate. Her flight was leaving, carrying other people toward their chosen futures, while she stood paralyzed between the life she'd tried to escape and the one she'd found by accident. Last call for flight KE471. Gate closing in 2 minutes. Minjun took her hands, his fingers intertwining with hers in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "I know the contract is over. I know this started as mutual convenience wrapped in legal language. But Naledi, what I feel for you, what you've given me, it's the most real thing in my life. Minjun, stay. Not for a contract, not for convenience, not to manage media narratives. Stay because Seoul is better with you in it, because I sleep better when you're near, Because chamomile tea tastes like hope. When you make it with intentions I never understood until I met you. The words hung between them like a bridge across impossible distance. Behind them, airline staff prepared to close the gate permanently. Before them stretched the uncertain territory of a love that had grown from deception into something that might survive the truth. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. Terrified, actually." "Of what?" "Of losing you again. Of waking up and discovering this was all elaborate wishful thinking. Of loving someone so completely that I forget how to exist without them." The gate agent made a final announcement. "Flight KE471 to Johannesburg. Final boarding call. Gate closing immediately." Naledi looked at the airplane waiting beyond the windows, then at the man whose eyes held her entire future in their depths. "My grandmother always said," she whispered, "that some love stories begin with thunder, some with whispers, but the ones that last, those begin with choice." She turned toward the gate, and Minjun's face crumpled with the anticipation of loss. But instead of boarding, she handed her ticket back to the gate agent. "I need to change my reservation," she said clearly. "I won't be flying today." The relief on Minjun's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "Are you sure?" he asked as she walked back to him, his voice breaking with raw vulnerability. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her hands trembling as they found his. "But I'm sure." He pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since she'd known him, Kang Min-jun, CEO of one of Korea's largest conglomerates, wept in public. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Contract or no contract, I love you." "I love you too," she whispered back. "Insomnia and all." But their story wasn't quite finished, because some love stories need to be declared to the world. The Kang Industries press room hummed with anticipation as Seoul's media elite filled every seat. Camera crews from 3 major networks had set up along the walls, and reporters whispered speculation about what announcement would follow the corporate scandal that had dominated headlines for 48 hours. Min-jun entered through the side door, his usual armor of perfect composure replaced by something more dangerous, authentic determination. Naledi walked beside him, her traditional Zulu necklace visible above her navy blazer, her hand steady in his. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," Min-jun began, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire. "I called this conference to address the recent allegations about Kang Industries and my personal life." Camera flashes erupted like lightning. "It's true that my relationship with Naledi Mthembu began as a contractual arrangement. It's true that we initially misrepresented the nature of our connection to the public." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "What you don't know is that this arrangement was orchestrated by individuals seeking to manipulate both my personal life and my company's leadership for their own gain. Park Woo-jin conspired to create, then destroy, this relationship for corporate purposes." A reporter stood. "Are you saying your mother was involved in corporate espionage?" "I'm saying that family loyalty, taken to extremes, can become family tyranny." He looked directly into the camera. "But today isn't about what was done to us. It's about what we choose to do now." He turned to Naledi, and the room held its breath. "Naledi Mthembu, 6 months ago you stumbled into my life during a rainstorm. You've taught me that insomnia is bearable when shared, that chamomile tea can taste like hope, and that some contracts are worth breaking." He dropped to one knee, producing a ring that caught the camera lights like captured starfire. "Will you marry me? Not for a visa, not for a company, not for a media narrative, but because I love you, and because I want to spend the rest of my sleepless nights learning how to sleep beside you." The room erupted. Camera flashes exploded like falling stars. But Naledi heard only her own heartbeat and the echo of her grandmother's voice. Some love stories begin with choice. Yes, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chaos. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll marry you. As Minjun slipped the ring onto her finger, every camera in Seoul captured the moment when a fake contract became a real promise. But the most important moment wasn't caught by any camera. It was the way Chairwoman Kang, watching from the back of the room, smiled through her tears and nodded her approval. Some forgiveness, it turned out, was worth more than any corporate empire. If you thought you knew this family's secrets, get ready to discover that some ties run deeper than blood. 1 year later, the penthouse balcony had been transformed into a garden oasis, with traditional Korean plants growing alongside South African succulents, a living metaphor for two worlds learning to bloom together. Naledi tended to the small herb garden while Minjun prepared their evening tea, a ritual that had evolved from desperate insomnia management to comfortable domesticity. "Your mother called," Naledi said, settling beside him on the outdoor sofa. "The wedding venue in Jeju is confirmed for next month. And your family?" "Flights booked. My grandmother is particularly excited to meet the man who caught me in the rain." She smiled. "Though she's concerned about your sleeping habits." "Reformed insomniac," Minjun corrected, pulling her closer. "Thanks to a very persistent teacher." The Seoul skyline glittered below them, but they had eyes only for each other and the life they'd built from the ashes of a corporate conspiracy. "Jinae sent the final guest list," Naledi continued. "Tommy is bringing his new girlfriend, the one from the immigration office who helped sort his visa situation. Ironic that our fake relationship helped him find a real one." "Speaking of real relationships," Naledi pulled out her phone. Park Woo-jin sent a letter from prison, an apology. Minjun's expression darkened. "You don't owe him forgiveness." "No, but I owe myself peace." She set the phone aside. "Besides, he gave us something valuable." "What's that?" "Proof that what we have is real. Because if it could survive that level of manipulation and betrayal, it can survive anything." The October evening was crisp with autumn promise. Exactly 1 year ago, rain had brought them together in chaos and confusion. Tonight, clear skies stretched endlessly above them. "Do you ever wonder," Minjun asked, "what would have happened if we'd never met? If my mother hadn't hired him? If you hadn't stumbled into that cafe?" "Every day." Naledi touched her engagement ring. Not the media spectacle from the press conference, but a simple band with a stone the color of honey, chosen in quiet privacy. "But then I think about my grandmother's stories. She always said the best love stories feel inevitable in retrospect, even when they felt impossible in the moment." "Inevitable," Minjun mused. "I like that." They drank their tea in comfortable silence, watching Seoul settle into its nightly rhythm. Below them, millions of people were living their own love stories, some beginning with thunder, some with whispers, some with choice. "The wedding photographer wants to recreate our first meeting," Naledi said eventually. "Rain machine and all?" "Rain machine and all." Minjun laughed, a sound that had become easier, more frequent over the months of healing. "Will you promise to stumble at exactly the right moment?" "Only if you promise to catch me." "Always," he said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "For the rest of our lives, I'll catch you in every storm." When two souls find each other across oceans and cultures, not all rain means a storm. Sometimes it's just the sky crying with happiness. As they prepared for bed that night, the chamomile tea ritual continuing its quiet magic, Naledi realized that she'd finally found what she'd been running toward all along, not a place on a map, but a home in another person's heart. And Minjun, sleeping peacefully for the first time in 4 years, dreamed of rain that felt like blessing and a love that had begun with thunder, but had settled into something as steady and essential as breathing. Some contracts, they'd learned, were written not on paper, but on the heart. And those, unlike their corporate counterpart, were meant to last forever. The rain had stopped. The real love